start it this way, but since we're in a church, I figured this would be appropriate. This is from the beginning of the book. Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which, the first radical known to man, who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. That's who he dedicates the book to. So, before we get into it a little bit, let's do a quick thought experiment. Let's say somehow you could travel back in time and you're talking to someone in 1968. And you say, okay, over the next 40 years, one political movement is going to dominate national elections. Every single political scientist is going to say this movement dominated national politics over this period. Their greatest leader became a two-term president. They talk about a revolution that was associated with their ideas. And even the opposing party, the opposing movement, had to couch their policies in terms of what the other movement was saying. And then you showed them the America of 2008 from the perspective of 1968. Regardless of what kind of conservative you are, whether you're concerned about social issues, whether you're concerned about the size and scope of government, whether you're concerned about spending, and this isn't meant to be rhetorical. Who here would say that conservatives clearly had won all the battles between 1968 and 2008? Not one person here. And yet, you crack open any political science textbook, and they will say conservatives dominated from 68 to 2008. And we had the Reagan Revolution. I've worked in the conservative movement for a few years now. Other than starting Youth for Western Civilization, you can find out more about us at westernyouth.org, and we focus more on issues like immigration, multiculturalism, things like that. But I got my start working at the Leadership Institute, which is a group, we call ourselves a do tank, not a think tank. And basically, we train people in political technology, how to win on the issues they care about. And one of the things that was kind of a pet peeve when I got to Washington, D.C. is you have all these, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kids coming to D.C. wanting to make a career in politics, and you get this conservative narrative of victory, where in the 1950s everything was bad, then Bill Buckley came along, we built this conservative movement, Reagan got elected, and now everything's fine. Not to, be a downer here, but what Reagan Revolution? What did we win? If there's not a single person here who says that we're winning, maybe we should rethink some of this. But we do have to go back. We won these elections, right? I mean, conservatives did win all these things. You look at the kinds of people who started the conservative movement back in the 1960s, they got elected to things like state representative and governor and things like that. Members of SDS weren't getting elected to anything. But they won on the big issues. This book tells us why, because this book is supposed to teach you how to take power away from the haves and give it to the have-nots. Saul Alinsky's words. But what it's not about is elections. Instead, this is a book to get your political opponents to fund you, to give in to your demands through things like corporations, through things like universities, through things like nonprofit organizations. You ever seem to notice that regardless of which way an election goes, the left always seems to have a lot more money than we do? No? This is why. So let's take a look at what Saul Alinsky is really saying here. First of all, has everyone heard of Alinsky and everyone understand his impact on the left? I mean, this is where Barack Obama got to start. This is Hillary Clinton's thesis statement. This is pretty core to what the left is all about today. There are two ways to look at this book. One is, this is, and I think a lot of Tea Party people are looking at it this way, this is Barack Obama's secret master plan to take over the country and destroy America. And there's a little bit of truth to that. There's always a nice little kernel of truth to the most far-right paranoia. But, and we can get into that a little bit. I mean, one of the things, it is a insight into the worldview of the hard left. And I think one of the key things that is brought out by this book, and one of the big differences between us and them, if I can talk in such terms, is Saul Alinsky says the reason we do this, the reason we care, he says this over and over and over again, the reason we do this is because we derive meaning from it. This is what makes our lives worth living. So, for the left, what life is about, what makes them get up in the morning, is politics. For many of us, what make us get up in the morning are, frankly, things like this, or families, or private lives. I mean, I think for a lot of conservatives and libertarians, politics is something we shouldn't really have to deal with, right? I mean, we kind of want to expand the private side of life as much as possible, and the public side of life, that basically means we don't want the government coming in and taking our stuff. I mean, I think we're all pretty much on board with that. But for Alinsky, it's totally different. Politics is life, and policy is more important than, say, family, or God, or morality. Speaking of morality, one of the things that conservatives take away from this is just how cynical he is. For Saul Alinsky, the most noble ideals are just so much propaganda to cover up the battle for self-interest. And also, I mean, the vulgarity and just the desperate desire to just kind of rip down anything smacking of excellence and hierarchy and the things that we want to look up to. I mean, that's really, that kind of radical egalitarianism, that's really the core of what the left is at its essence. But that said, I think that's the wrong way to look at this. My boss at the Leadership Institute, Morton Blackwell, has a saying that political technology is philosophically neutral, meaning that it doesn't, you owe it to your ideology to win. And it's not just a question of being right on the issues and then somehow everything's okay. There's a famous episode of South Park where there's a group of people and they're trying to figure out how to make money. And they have, step 1, collect materials. Step 2, step 3, profit. And for a lot of conservatives, this seems to be how it is. Step 1, read a lot of books. Step 2, step 3, victory. This is about step 2. Let's look at the context of when Alinsky is writing this. This is written in the early 70s. He's writing this right after all the turmoil of the New Left rising in the late 60s. You have the hippies, you have the yippies, you have Students for a Democratic Society, you have our good friend and President Obama's good friend, Bill Ayers. You have the Weatherman Underground blowing themselves up, which is hilarious, although it's an uncharitable thing to say. You have all these people, rising and going nuts and burning flags and going crazy. And Alinsky is saying, this is just so much noise. The point of this book for his target audience, and an important lesson we need to take away from this, if we can start looking at the kind of things conservatives can get from this book, is not to be a rhetorical radical, but a realistic radical. Now, my group, YWC, is known with some justification as a pretty hard-right radical group. That's what we are. These are the issues I care about. These are the things I felt I had to do something on. But over the last few years, I've worked with all different kinds of conservatives and libertarians and everything else, and I don't talk the same to all of them. I find out what they care about, and I operate off the premise that they share. And then I'll pull on it, like you would pull on a thread on a sweater. If you want to win, if you want to play the game and not just scream, kill the umpire, you have to accept the world as it is. If you say, well, the system is broken and this is wrong and we're going to have a second American Revolution and everything else, yeah, you know what? You feel pretty good and you're being courageous and everything else. But Alinsky sneers at that and he says, you're just doing it to make yourself feel bad. In the miniseries John Adams, there's the famous part where Ben Franklin goes over to John Adams and he says, you insulted Mr. Dickinson. You insulted him publicly. And what did you get out of it, other than making yourself feel better, of course? And for a lot of political activists, the flip side of, politics gives us meaning, Alinsky is cautioning, is that it's not just about making you feel better. I mean, at some point we actually have to get somewhere. The most important thing for any organizer, Alinsky says, the most important skill to have is communication. You have to operate within the realm of your own people's experience. Now, there are two aspects to this. One example he gives here is he talks about how leftists used to burn the flag. He says that's stupid. Because what they should have done is said the flag is the symbol of everything progressives stand for, and we're the truth defenders of the flag. Conservatives would be wise to adopt this kind of strategy too. Although, we're actually sincere in our love for the flag and these types of symbols. But the second thing is you have to operate within the experience of your own activists. And this is a bit tougher for us. There are parts in this book, for example, where it says, what you get when you're in jail. And he talks about like the kinds of things you learn as an organizer while you're sitting in jail. Has anybody here been in jail because of their political experience?
Not yet.
Not yet. FEMA camps, no. That, I haven't either. Full disclosure, I have not been sent to jail for my activism yet. But if I got up here and started ranting and screaming about how we need to start handcuffing ourselves to the gates, I mean, you would all think I'm crazy, and you'd be right. For conservatives, just getting up there and waving a sign is pretty new. The good news, of course, is the left has never really seen this as activists either. And so, us waving a sign saying, hey, lower taxes, is so outside their experience, they lose their mind and start getting Tactics is about doing what you can with what you have. Now, I'm sure you all have heard Rush Limbaugh and some other people talk about some of the lessons of this book, or some of the rules that he gives. Tell me if you've heard this one. Raise your hand. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Okay, a few hands. And basically what he's saying here, and this gets into another thing that conservatives have some trouble with, is politics is about conflict. People, you're going to hurt someone's feelings. It happens. That's rough. And a lot of us, especially libertarians, a lot of us feel that we can somehow create a world where power doesn't exist. Where there's not politics. Who here has kids? Okay. Who here, tries to send them to bed and they don't want to go to bed? And even though, you should, hey, go to bed. No. Well, okay. Now you're in a negotiation, believe it or not. That's politics. Every relationship you've ever been in, that's politics. Every group that you've ever, even if it's a church group, if it's a sports team, if the state disappeared tomorrow, politics and power still exist. And fundamentally, it's about conflict. That's hard for us to deal with, but it's true. And what he's saying is society is so complicated and so hard to understand. You can study aspects of social policy for years and years and years and still, only be more aware of what you don't know. But if you're trying to get change, you have to be able to point to one person and say, this is what we're opposed to. Example, cut it. That's using the rule. He has a saying, I can't fight City Hall, but I can fight the mayor. This realistic, and some would say maybe cynical and even cold-blooded understanding of politics is necessary for us to understand. And it's also necessary for us to understand why, frankly, we've been losing. Because we're trying to convince them that they're wrong and that the common good may be better achieved by the policies we're advocating. We have to acknowledge the possibility that there's no longer any common good to appeal to, or that at least some of the activists on the other side do not care. I think a lot of what we've been talking about with unions in the last lecture have a lot to do with this, where it's very explicit that this is about benefiting a privileged few as opposed to the people as a whole. One of the great difficulties in democratic politics, especially for those advocating for limited government, is the idea of fighting concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. Because the people who get the concentrated benefits will fight a lot harder. The type of people he was organizing, that Alinsky was organizing, were people who had what he would rub raw the resentments of the community deliberately. I mean, if you call him a troublemaker, he'd be like, yeah, that's part of what being an organizer is. And get them to obtain benefits largely paid for by all of you. We have a bit of a different task. In many ways, experience chiefly deals with working on a college campus. Now, I talked a little bit before. I'm not saying ignore elections. I'm just saying, I mean, look, guys, let's be honest. George W. Bush was president, nominal conservative. Conservatives supposedly control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the presidency. Government spending go up and down, up or down.
Up.
It's a two-party system. That's the best we're ever going to do. Realistically speaking, does anybody think we're ever going to control every single lever of government again? Yeah. So what do we do with that knowledge? Well, let's take a look at some examples on the right. Whatever you think about that, let's take a look at the Ron Paul people. Think of where Ron Paul was in 2008, and how his activists were. 2008, getting banned from debates, people laughing at him and calling him nuts and everything else, and people might still do that. But the fact is, his kid is a senator. There are congressmen who are elected now looking to him as a leader. He's got one of the largest youth activist groups in the entire country, like going out there working for him right now. He's raising as much money as the front runners. Alinsky has an example in this book where he says, well, we tried to go to this political convention and they sent us home. And he says, okay, there are three things you can do. One, you can find some wailing wall and cry about it. Two, you can start planting bombs, but that's just going to push people over to the other side. And the last thing you can do, and the only thing you can do really, is you go home, you build power, and at the next convention, you be the delegates. That's what the Ron Paul guys have been doing. And that's what conservatives as a whole need to be doing. But it goes beyond just political parties. One of the tactics that he talks about here is the idea of tactics by proxy. One of the things that the leftists will often do is they'll elect people as shareholders meetings. They'll vote as a block. And they'll use this to get corporations to donate to, say, certain progressive organizations. Now, a lot of conservatives like to talk about limited government and making sure that we have a pro-business attitude and everything else. Well, I hate to tell you, but Walmart and Coca-Cola and Microsoft and all these things are donating to the left. They're not donating to the conservatives. Scott, let me ask you a quick question. Is Walmart donating to Americans for Prosperity anytime soon?
I don't know.
Are there any major Fortune 500 corporations who that are donating to Americans for Prosperity?
That I know?
Yeah.
No, not that I know of.
Not one. Okay, but I can tell you who they are donating to. They were donating to Acorn, and that was around. They're donating to groups like the NAACP and the National Council of La Raza. I mean, you had Bank of America donating to Acorn. That should tell you something. Whether they're doing it out of sincerity or fear, it doesn't really matter. But it should tell us that the sources of power in this society are larger than just political parties and elections. There is also an aspect of meaning to this that conservatives can adopt. I'm skeptical of it being like the center of our lives as it is for so many of the left, but how many people have only really been doing this kind of work in the last couple of years since President Obama was elected? Okay, that's pretty amazing, and that tells us a lot. And how many people get something out of it, feel good about what they're doing? Does anybody not feel good about what they're doing? Is anybody really utterly miserable about having to do this kind of work? Okay, and I assume most of us aren't getting paid for this. So we are deriving psychological benefits from this. So to a certain extent, we're getting meaning from this too. And stop thinking yourselves as activists. Put yourself in the mind of an organizer training new activists. This is supposed to be fun. Your people should want to be doing these kinds of activism. Your people should be coming back for more. When I start a group on a college campus, frankly, it's usually 2 or 3 kids who are probably scared out of their minds. But once they start going to protests, once they start doing events on campus, once you start building that kind of a subculture, building bonds with the people around them, they start looking at themselves differently. That's what organizing is really all about. And the idea of being an organizer as a calling, that's something very foreign to the right, but it's something that's you're starting to see. I mean, I think what's genuinely new about the Tea Party is conservatives and libertarians getting active in politics in such a way that has nothing to do with being tied to a particular political party or a particular candidate. And I like to think that even if a nominal conservative gets elected, that this movement will still be around. I mean, take a poll right now. If a Republican gets elected, are you guys still going to be active?
Absolutely.
Are you going to hold his feet to the fire?
We trust that less.
Right. I don't think that was true. I don't think that was true 10 years ago. That is something new. I want to take a few questions after this and get into more specific examples, especially about some of the rules, because I saw a lot of people had some experience with this, or at least some familiarity with some of the specifics. But I want to sum up here. This is a pretty bitter tonic to swallow for a lot of conservatives. This is not a fun book to read in many ways. It's about attacking people's private lives in some cases. It's about punishing people for ideas they might sincerely hold. It's about using fear and intimidation to take money that belongs to somebody else and use it to fund your own projects. But the left uses these tactics whether we like it or not. And the world of power, the world of conflict, the world of dog-eat-dog, smash-mouth politics is the world we live in, whether we like it or not. I do not think that there are tactics in here that conservatives and libertarians can use in good conscience. That said, the strategic viewpoint of Saul Alinsky, the idea that rhetoric is often a means to achieve a certain end rather than something that should be taken as an end in itself, like that is a viewpoint that I share. Talk is cheap. And I'm not in politics to display my virtue or to show how smart I am or make me feel better about myself. I'm here because I want specific things. And what I have in mind goes far beyond the next election cycle or getting some guy with good hair elected president or congressman or something like that. No one smiles. Let's take a step back and end where we began. I started out with a pretty cynical and defeatist message in a way. I don't want that to get you dispirited. I want that to make you more militant, if I can use the word. We are not winning. We are not winning. And I have very little patience for the conservative groups in D.C. that are waving around pictures of Reagan and telling me everything's okay. I have very little patience for people who want to be in politics as a career and want to claw to the top of the existing conservative movement to do something. Look, if you want a career in politics, be on the center left. Because the way things are going, the center right is just going to advocate what the center left advocates. They'll just do it 5 years later. And if you're on the center left, you'll get better paid and the media will like you. So what's the point? If you're going to do it, let's do it. If you want to cut government, let's cut government. If you want to advance the culture in a certain direction, let's do that. If you want to make Michigan a right to work state, let's make Michigan a right to work state. So, that in mind, I want to take some questions now, and feel free to ask me about any specific experiences on college campuses. I can tell you one thing. If the book is about taking power away from the haves and giving it to the have-nots, there are no greater have-nots I can think of than conservatives and libertarians on college campuses. Because on those places, we really are the radicals. Yeah.
Good. Organize the organize. It seems that's one of his rules. We start within the Tea Party. There's a lot of alpha personalities, and it always seems like we're trying to herd cats. We're trying to get ourselves organized, and we struggle enough with that. Trying to organize a group of organized people seems to be really hard for us to do. Any other organizations we should be looking to organize within our Tea Party groups? Like Chamber of Commerce's, should we reach out to those people? I mean,
If you're on the immigration people, not the Chamber of Commerce. This is a bit outside what Alinsky said, but I've got a rule that I think actually works pretty well as far as working with the problem you described. You're not going to be able to, every once in a while somebody will have an idea like, guys, I got a great idea. We're going to get all the different leaders together in a room, and we're going to start one big group. And instead of 7 groups, we'll have 1 group. And actually what you have is now you have 8 groups. A better rule is, look, Morton Blackwell actually has his own political rules, and one of them is don't stop to kick every barking dog. So if somebody does something to annoy you, or somebody takes a cheap shot at you, you don't have to respond every single time. Every single time, it's amazing how far just being, nice and cordial will get you. But I think a bigger lesson and something that I would actually use here is, rather than trying to unite everybody in one big group, start a group yourself and generate so much momentum and so much activism that the other group's followers will start coming to you. And eventually the other leaders will start coming to you. Look, the group that triumphs in politics is not the one with the right ideas, it's the group that's the best organized, and the group that's the most active. So as far as dealing with the problem of alpha personalities, sometimes just don't. Just keep doing what you're doing individually, make sure they know about it, and the people who are worthwhile will start coming to you. As far as the people who want to be, the commander of a group of 3 people, there's nothing you can do about that sometimes, And it's much better to just, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, we're doing this, if you want to come out, come on out. That'll get you a lot farther, I think, than, you should join us, or fighting with them, even about something that's important. Sometimes it's best to just let it go. Yeah?
You had mentioned that you are active in getting college students together.
That's what I do.
That is, I think, at just about every organization that's represented here, the topic of conversation on a regular basis. I've been pointed to and said, what are you doing about getting young people to come? How can we, we've gone to some of the college campuses, passed out information about who we are, but, aside from that, what can we do to get more young people to come to the meetings and blend the gray hairs with the young people?
One of the things Alinsky talks about in the book is getting the community to invite you and establishing your credibility right away. Now keep in mind, Saul Alinsky is this, Jewish guy from Chicago, and he's doing a lot of organizing in neighborhoods that are far away from where he's from, and a lot of Black and Chicano and other minority communities. So why should some inner city Black guys listen to some Jewish guy who's coming in and telling them what to do? There's no way you can win that struggle. And so what he would do is he basically would go to them, for, assuming he didn't get an outright invitation, which once you establish a certain level of credibility, you might just get that. But assuming he didn't have that, he would say, he gives an example of when he's trying to organize a rent strike. And he goes up to someone and says, hey, that building is pretty crummy. And they're like, yeah, well, what can we do about it? And it's like, well, what if you didn't pay rent? Well, we get kicked out and everything else. Well, yeah, well, what if nobody paid the rent? It's like, hey, yeah, well, could they do that? Hey, why don't you come over and talk to some of my friends? The key is to find out what they want and how you can meet their needs. A problem with a lot of, I don't mean this as criticism, this is just a common problem. A lot of conservative groups will say, well, we need to get young people involved because that will allow us to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you're not going to win people over with that approach. You need to figure out what can you do for them. Now, frankly, speaking as somebody who organizes conservative college groups on campus for a living, one of the big things that you can provide, at least ideally, and they can't, is money. Because, at least hopefully, you guys have jobs, and they don't. You can, if you don't have huge sums of money yourself, you can get people to come to their meetings. You can get people to come to their speakers, because frankly, there's a big difference between 50 people coming to a speaker and 20 people coming to a speaker. And if you've got people showing up to that, they'll look at you as an asset because you're helping them generate positive media coverage. That's another thing right there, helping them generate positive media coverage. Getting speakers for their meetings that you may know that they don't. Think of it in terms of what do they, and ask them outright, what do you guys want? Approach them from that perspective, and then you've got a working relationship. And take it from Alinsky, kind of set up your own invitation to lead. Other question? Yes?
Yeah, seems like going through all the questions and everything. The elephant to me in the room is the hard work of actually talking one-on-one with people. Like you say, listening to what they want, asking, how can I help? Versus, how are you going to help me?
Right. left has, and one more, and then put it off after this. You need to create a subculture. What the left have that we don't is you have this kind of permanent activist class among the left that doesn't really exist on the right. And that makes it a lot easier for them. He talks in the very beginning of the book about the toll that McCarthyism took on the ranks of the left-wing activists in the 40s and everything like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, the Red Scares and all these kinds of things. What I took away from that is how foreign that is to conservatives. I mean, there aren't many conservative leaders that conservatives today associate with from like the 20s and 30s and 40s. You go to some lefty anarchist group on college campus, they're naming stuff after Henry Goldman. You know, the right doesn't really have an equivalent to that. So the idea of setting up an institution, bringing people in, and then they just kind of adopt this kind of stuff via osmosis is also very valuable. One of the books I strongly recommend reading as well is Dedication and Leadership by Douglas Hyde. Write that down because it's worth it. He was a leader of the Daily Worker in London. He was a communist organizer. Then he converted to Catholicism and became a conservative. And basically what he writes about is the idea of taking people who don't really even know what they're getting involved in and turning them into leaders. And one more question, we get out of that. Yeah.
He spoke of herding cats. I've been doing this for 30 years. And I have to tell you, the biggest drawback to forming an organization or keeping an organization are the leaders themselves. Because they're so ego involved that they can't see the picture. They can't see the long picture. I happen to think that you have something to offer me. Even though you're young and inexperienced and
You're not going to make that an issue with the campaign.
what I'm saying is they think they know it all, and they don't.
Yeah.
So, you know, our biggest problem right along has been getting these egos under control.
I would say don't recruit leaders, build leaders. That's the distinction here. Again, if you're trying to recruit people who are already leading organizations, I mean, people get used to having their own thing. I mean, I've got my own group. I've got YWC. If somebody came along and said, hey, like, I've got a group too, and we're bigger and stronger, and you should just kind of come in with us, and, you know, then we'll be better off. I'd be kind of annoyed, even if, objectively speaking, I know that might work. Because I'd be like, no, this is mine. But if I see and come to my own realization, well, this group is doing more, it has more money, it's